I want to thank everyone for coming to ZendCon. This is, I believe, our 11th ZendCon, but it is the first time in Las Vegas. So we hope you have a lot of fun and you enjoy the city, but make sure you don't miss all the activities at ZendCon. Before I get started, I wanted to thank our sponsors. Without our sponsors, we can't make ZendCon happen. IBM Bluemix, which is IBM's platform as a service built on Cloud Foundry, who are our platinum sponsors. Our gold sponsors, IBM Power Systems, IBM I, and Intel. And Intel did a lot of work with us on some of the PHP 7 enhancements I'll talk about later on. And our silver sponsors, Bugsnag and OSS Cube. Without these companies sponsoring ZendCon, it wouldn't happen. So let's give them a round of applause. We've got some more. Bronze sponsors, BCD, Joomla, Pluralsight, and then some special sponsors, 100TB, Amazon Web Services Marketplace, and Sticker Mule. And I also wanted to highlight all the exhibitors. Let's thank the exhibitors by going to their booths. They've sent people over. They're making a lot of investments in our community, in the PHP community, and they'd love to be able to show you what they're doing. Now, before I get started with the main keynote, I did want to just briefly touch on some recent news, which we announced 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, Zend agreed to join Rogwave Software. Rogwave Software is a company that, like us, is focused at developers and code. So as we started to talk, it became a really interesting combination because we have exactly the same focus areas as serving developers in a much better way. They grew up from the C++ space. I was actually a customer in the past, so I used their pretty cool C++ libraries. And then they extended to Java and C#. But as we were talking, we found that they had a desire to extend to web and mobile and really get into what I would say the largest web community out there. They also have an open source support offering where they support Linux, Apache, MySQL. And so from our perspective, it really looked like together we could support you in a much, much better way. We could support the full LAMP stack. They've got over 3,000 large enterprise customers, a lot of them doing PHP. So in the coming months, you're going to see more offerings and more ability of Zend to serve you much, much better, not only in the US, but really globally. Now, one of the things I'm really fortunate of is that I get to talk to a lot of you. I get to interact with a lot of you. I see a lot of companies building really amazing PHP-based applications. And I get to see the tools you're using, the architectural changes, and a lot of the innovation. And so what I'm going to talk about today is how I'm seeing the PHP ecosystem change. And I do want to say here that this, in my opinion, and I've been doing PHP for a long time, this is one of the most exciting years in PHP history. There's just so much innovation coming together, and I call it a PHP Renaissance. And a Renaissance is really a time of huge innovation, huge change, and it's not only technology change. I think we're seeing a cultural change in the PHP community. Now, I'm sure all of you have heard of the Renaissance. The Renaissance was an amazing period of innovation. It was a period of change, cultural change. It became more about the individual people. And in this graphic, you see probably the most important innovation in the Renaissance period, which was the printing press. By the way, a lot of you don't know this, but one of the first books printed on the printing press was actually a PHP book. You can see that from the picture. But it was an amazing time of innovation, and what's happening now in the PHP space is the same. I'll touch on a lot of different pieces, but you'll see that there's a huge refresh happening in the application market. The frameworks are really transforming. We're seeing a lot of change on the tool side. And all these changes are happening together at a time when the runtime itself, with PHP 7, is really taking PHP to the next level. And if there's one goal that I have for this keynote, is really to equip you to tell the same story, because PHP doesn't always get the recognition it really should, even though it runs more than half of the web. And this is a story we really need to be telling, because a lot of the world doesn't realize how much innovation there really is in the PHP space and how amazing it is to be a PHP developer. I kind of think about this renaissance as 3 different areas that are really driving a lot of that influence. Standardization that's happening in the PHP space, and I would say it's probably the first time ever where we've really had effective standards. There have been some attempts in the past, but they never really caught on. They're really catching on now. With those standards and some other changes, we're seeing a lot more reuse in the PHP space. And we'll touch on that too. And then also performance. And it's not only going to be about PHP 7, I'll also touch on some other areas where I'm seeing performance really changing. But all these changes ultimately are happening at the same time. And within 12 to 24 months, I think we're going to have a whole new refresh of what it means to be a PHP developer. So what are some of the reasons for this change? I would say 2 key reasons. The first one, companies continue to have a high sense of urgency to deliver innovation faster and embrace agile delivery. And we've talked a lot in the past, also last ZendCon, about DevOps and automation and how you can really streamline your delivery process. One thing we didn't touch on quite as much was what it means from an architectural point of view and how you actually develop your applications. And what you're going to see is there's been a lot of change in the past 18 months on how developers are able to much quicker assemble applications but still ensure high quality and really eliminate a lot of the waste. Because the value that you deliver to your company is when you're actually able to code features that help the company's business versus reinventing the wheel and rewriting things that have been done over and over again. The second change that's happening is the fact that all applications are becoming a lot more contextual, personalized, data-driven, and so everything is very real-time and very dynamic. So whereas in the past we kind of, we went from static to mostly dynamic, but not always, and it didn't always depend on the user. Now, depending on who you are and where you're at, your experience changes. So everything has to be dynamic, everything is microservices, and it has to be very, very responsive, which puts a lot of pressure on not only the runtimes, but also the architectures. How do you build an architecture that can really scale to that level? So these are really tailwinds to creating that change. Now, what I'm going to talk about is, from an ecosystem perspective, is how has standardization happened, and then what is the impact of that on reuse? And ultimately, the goal here is to ensure that you're actually not spending too much of your time to rebuild what others have built, and you can really focus on innovating. So one of the change agents that I wanted to highlight today is the PHP Framework Interoperability Group. That's the last time I'm going to spell out the acronym, so basically we'll call it the PHP FIG. And the PHP FIG is basically a consortium of PHP projects, the most popular PHP projects, and they've come together to define standards in the PHP space. So we have projects like Zend Framework, Joomla, Drupal, Laravel, Sugar CRM. Really, most big projects in the PHP space are represented. And the PHP FIG has basically started to come out with standards which most of these projects are adopting. Ultimately, with the goal to really enable interoperability so developers can start mixing and matching code and really take the best of all worlds and focus your time on delivering innovation. The PHP FIG has already passed 6 standards. 2 of them have to do with auto-loading, which means you can start and interoperate different frameworks. Coding standards, so you feel comfortable when you're writing in one framework and then moving to the next. A logger interface. And in my opinion, the most recent one is probably the most exciting, which is PSR 7, which is, who is that? Which, by the way, Zend's Matthew Wire-O'Finney led that standard, which is basically an HTTP messaging interface standard. And what that means is that you're always touching HTTP, right? You're taking an HTTP request, you're doing some kind of transformation in business logic, and then you're outputting that HTTP request. The problem is everyone was doing it differently. And so you couldn't just take a component from one framework that was touching HTTP and mix and match that with another framework's component that was touching HTTP. With PSR 7, and that's something that, even though it's only been passed about a couple of months ago, has already started to be broadly adopted, we're starting to see really strong interoperability between both applications and frameworks. So PHP Fig have really set the foundation for standardization in our space like never before. We've always had a very fragmented community, even though PHP was huge, but every community was doing things very differently. We're starting to see some real standardization. And in the past, if you go up to a developer who is building a Drupal application, you ask them, what kind of developer are you? In most cases, they wouldn't tell you they're a PHP developer, right? They tell you, I'm a Drupal developer. But that's actually starting to change, because now if you're a Drupal developer, you're also developing frameworks and you're using other components, and you actually are becoming a pretty broad PHP developer. Now, standards are great, but if you don't have a way to mix and match that code and get the components and assemble them, they only go that far. And that's really where Composer and Packagist have come in. Composer and Packagist have been very broadly adopted in the PHP space. How many people here are actually using Composer? Good, so I think we're about 80%. That's my mental math, my real-time math. So there's been very broad adoption. You can see in this graph how fast Composer and Packagist have been adopted just in the last 18 months. And for those who don't know what it is, it's basically a way to assemble different packages and components from different projects. You basically write a composer.json file. You basically list all the different components you need, and Composer will automatically pull it down. This level of sharing has never existed in our space before. Now, if no one adopts it, that doesn't help, but we see 80% here already using it. And all these projects on this slide have already adopted Composer and Packagist. And I'm probably missing a few too. So our ecosystem has really changed from being kind of a very disparate set of projects that are really not communicating too much. At most, they're embracing one framework from someplace, and everyone is starting to mix and match. And so being a PHP developer today is very different than it even was 24 months ago. And without this ability to mix and match, this wouldn't be a renaissance. What's really enabling this renaissance is you're getting these great projects, you're getting these great components, and you're getting an amazing amount of sharing. I would almost equate, like, the kind of packages kind of sharing to what the printing press did to spreading the word back in the day. And that's what we're seeing today. Now, we're also fortunate to have at least 2 big application releases. As you know, in the PHP space, there's probably 6 applications that probably run about 60–70% of PHP. And 2 of the big ones have major new versions come out this year. Magento 2 is going to be coming out later this year, and so is Drupal 8. And both of these projects have been reworks and re-architecting of the old products for at least 24 months. So there's a huge amount of work that has gone into them. But the reason why I'm talking about this, not only is this going to influence how the whole PHP space refreshes over the next 18 to 24 months, because customers are going to be interested in adopting Magento 2, Drupal 8, but these re-architectings of these projects have embraced what I talked about before. They're both heavily using Composer now. They're using components of Zend Framework 2. They're using components of Symfony. And then I listed some additional examples of additional components that these projects are using. For example, Drupal 8 is using Guzzle, which is a really cool HTTP client. There you go. There's the author of Guzzle. And that's also being used by Amazon Web Services SDK. So that just shows you that example of really good component someone innovated, and now that's being used by multiple projects. And that's really the world we're starting to live in, and the opportunity for you as a developer to much better leverage what other developers are doing and not spend a lot of time and waste your time on just reinventing the wheel. Now, the other major driving force in this renaissance is performance. And we talked about the why a few minutes ago. But let's talk about the what. So the most important innovation at this time around performance is PHP 7. I'm going to highlight some other important advances that we're making around performance. But there's no doubt that PHP 7 is going to have the biggest impact on the PHP space. And we haven't had something like this probably for at least 10 years. I would say probably since PHP 5.0, which was even before that. But what I'd like to do is kind of share with you the journey on how we actually got to PHP 7. It was clear to us that we wanted to improve performance because every version of PHP, we were working on performance and improving it. But at around PHP 5.4, and you're going to see that in a few graphs later on, we started to plateau. We really didn't make much progress on performance anymore. And so back in 2012, we decided to build a just-in-time compiler for PHP. It sounded like a really cool idea. We had other dynamic languages doing it, like V8, HHVM. So we saw a lot of different just-in-time compilers out there. And we're like, well, if they can do it, we can do it too. It sounds great. We'll run the machine code faster, and everything will run faster. And so we worked on this for about 18 months. And we had a really great JIT running synthetic benchmarks amazingly fast. It was actually faster than almost any JIT that we found out there. And actually, in a few benchmarks, we even beat GCC, which is the C compiler, because we were optimizing more effectively than the GCC compiler. So we were extremely excited, and you can see some of the numbers on this slide. But then we ran it on real-world applications, and we basically saw minimal to no performance gain. So maybe 2 to 3% at best, and that didn't justify the complexity of having a JIT compiler. So you can imagine we were pretty bummed out. I would say depressed is probably a better way to call it after 18 months of very hard work. But you know, necessity is the mother of invention and innovation. We don't give up very easily. We've been doing this for too much time to give up. So we went back to the drawing board, and we started to do a lot of research and more profiling about the memory footprint. Because one thing we had noticed as we were doing profiling is that the way we were using the CPU architecture was not ideal. We saw a lot of cache misses. We saw a lot of branch prediction misses. So a lot of things at the CPU level we realized were just not working well. And they were not related to JIT or not JIT. They were related to the fact that we had some serious memory issues, and we were just constantly thrashing the CPU with memory. So we came up with a whole different approach. We had no idea if it's going to work. And we basically decided to redo all the basic data structures, memory manager. And that's how PHPNG was ultimately born. And PHPNG stands for PHP Next Generation, which became the foundation for PHP 7. So we started this in January 2014. We split from the mainstream PHP. We took a code base, basically broke pretty much everything. All the data structures changed. But we wanted to stay 100% compatible. So there was what I would call an easier route, which is let's try and rewrite it and see if it goes faster. And there was a more difficult route, which was let's just change all the data structures, but try and keep everything else intact. It may sound easier, but it's actually harder. So we did that, and remarkably, within about a month, we were able to get it to compile and have enough features to run a very simple synthetic benchmark, basically for loops, Mandelbrot, and hash functions. We definitely couldn't run an application, so this was really a mean and lean, stripped-down version of PHP. And we got really great results. We got more than 2x the performance improvement over PHP 5.6. And by the way, in this graph, you can actually see that progression of performance within PHP. And you can also see how we hit a wall around PHP version 5.4. So we were excited, enthusiastic, but we got even better performance improvements with the JIT. So we were still a bit skeptical, right? We had no idea if this is actually going to help or not. And between this moment and actually being able to run some web application, I think it took about a month and a half, 2 months more. Because we actually had to get some basic functions working, we had to get some extensions working. So only after a month and a half or 2 months were we actually able to run a real-world application. And we chose WordPress because WordPress is very simple, it's not object-oriented, and we got really amazing results. Now, these results are from about 3 months after that, so they're not the exact results we got at the time, but they're pretty close. We basically got a 2x performance improvement on a real-world WordPress application. So that was phenomenal, and at that point, we really started to get excited. We suddenly saw that as we took the memory footprint down, as we optimized our data structures, we were really starting to get most of what we could out of the CPU architecture. And in fact, the minute we did that, it became a lot easier and a lot more apparent to us where else we needed to do work. And so we just continued to improve it. And really over that year, PHP 7 just got faster and faster and faster. And by the way, just to give you a bit of an anecdotal evidence on the improvement, that one WordPress request, which is basically the WordPress front page, went from needing to run 9.4 billion CPU instructions for a single page to 2.4 billion. So that's how big of a difference we really were able to make with this change. And here you can see some very recent benchmarks that we did about a week ago. These are benchmarks that take PHP 5.6 as a baseline, so that 100% is PHP 5.6. And we benchmarked against HHVM 3.10, which is, I think, the latest version of HHVM, and PHP 7 and RC5. And you can see that PHP 7 is over 2 times faster than PHP 5.6 in most situations. And these are all real-world applications. This is Zend Framework, Sugar CRM, Magento, Drupal, pretty much everything. And you can also see that on most benchmarks, we're also faster than HHVM. PHP 7 is definitely going to make a huge difference to the PHP community. And in fact, we believe that PHP 7 is going to get adopted much, much faster than previous versions because the changes are so dramatic. Now, PHP 7 is not only about performance. I did want to share that because I think the performance is going to be one of the key drivers to adoption of PHP 7, but there are a lot of new features in PHP 7. And if you want to hear more about both the performance side and the features, right after this at 10 a.m., Zev Surasky, our CTO and co-founder, is going to be giving a talk, the PHP 7 journey, in this room. And he'll talk a lot more about PHP 7 itself. Now, Dimitri, do you mind standing up? By the way, Dimitri Stogov is the lead on PHP 7. And I want to congratulate Dimitri because he did a phenomenal job leading this effort and doing really something that I think is, was almost impossible at the time from our perspective. Now, for those who are not faint of heart, Dimitri is giving a talk at 11:15 where he's going to go through all the gory details of what we did to improve the performance. I do highly recommend CC++ background, and it is going to be a very intense session. But if you do want to get a bit of a flavor of what was really done, that's a session I would absolutely attend. Now, from Zend's perspective, we think PHP 7 is so important that we've really started to focus all our energy and effort in PHP 7, on PHP 7. And we've gotten a lot of requests from our customers to help make their environments ready for PHP 7. So we've already started a PHP 7 training course. We have migration services where we've already helped customers get ready for PHP 7. We're publishing a lot of content on the Zend Developer Zone, the PHP 7 related. We also just made a Zend Studio 13 release in September. We have a really cool new feature in Studio 13 called PHP 7 Express. It basically scans your code and finds upwards compatibility issues, and also has some refactoring capabilities so you can actually fix issues that are going to bite you if you're moving to PHP 7. We'll talk a bit later on about Zend Framework 3, but we also made a conscious decision that when we invest in Zend Framework 3, it's going to be with PHP 7 optimization in mind. So Zend Framework 3 will work on PHP 5.6, but anything we do around performance and benchmarking, given that the performance characteristics are so different between the engines, is going to be focused at PHP 7, because that's where we think the future is, and that's really where we want to put our investment. Now, getting ready for PHP 7 is difficult if you don't have a really good build of PHP 7. And so what we're also doing today is we're actually putting out there a technology preview of Zend Server for PHP 7. That is a full, complete PHP 7 stack. It includes Z-Ray, it includes our APM capabilities, it includes a lot of our DevOps capabilities. We'd love to get your feedback on that. So in the link below, and you'll also be able to find it in our website, that's where you can download Zend Server for PHP 7 technology preview. The initial version is going to be for Ubuntu and Debian systems. We're about to release a CentOS and RHEL version, and then we're going to follow up with additional updates over the coming months. But our goal is to have Zend Server ready for PHP 7 as quickly as possible. So what else are we doing in this Renaissance? We released Zend Server 8.5 in July. And I'll talk in a minute about how this really relates to this change in the ecosystem. From our perspective, this was the most important release we had done in years. In 2013, we released Zend Server 6. We added a lot of DevOps and capabilities and API-centric capabilities, and it really made Zend Server fabric. But in Zend Server 8.5, we made some very, very big changes. We made a huge number of changes on the UX to really make it more fun and more productive. We added a new feature to Z-Ray that helps you actually trace an end user who's having a problem. So if they're having a problem by IP or token, you can actually see them. You can watch them on the website and make sure you're really solving the root cause of their problem. From a performance perspective, while it's great to have a faster runtime, a lot of performance issues have to do with I/O or other problems. So we made a big investment around our job queue capability and added new features. Now, where this intersects most with this PHP Renaissance thought process is the fact that we added application awareness to the product. We basically came to the conclusion that as you're building, let's say, Drupal 8, and you're using some Symfony, using some Zend framework, and maybe you're using a cloud service, you need to start having a view of your code that is not just PHP-centric. You need to have a framework-level view. So for example, if you're using Zend framework, we have an event-based system, right? We have observers. You have events that are being triggered. How do you get visibility into that level of architecture versus just the code level? And that's where we added a plugin interface to Zend Server that actually helps you add application and framework-specific functionality. Now, where this became really exciting for us was when we launched Zend Gallery. Zend Gallery is like an app store for Zend Server where the community can actually contribute plugins for projects that you're working on. So we built the first few plugins. We launched this in July. It's October now. We already have 24 plugins in the App Store. We have 9 more on the way. Out of the 24, 9 were contributed by the community. And we have 9 more contributed by the community in pipeline. So I would say that within 2 to 3 months, we're going to have more community-contributed plugins in Zend Server and in the Zend Gallery than Zend has built on their own.